I don't live much of an exciting life, but whenever people ask me for a scary story, this is the one I tell. I was 15 at the time, about to start my sophomore year of high school. I grew up in a typical beach town, packed with tourists during the summer, but a ghost town as soon as the season ended. The bars and restaurants all closed down, and it's just the locals, the sky, and the ocean. If you've never been down the shore during the off-season, I would strongly recommend it. It's one of the strangest yet most calming feelings you can get from this life. As cliché as it sounds, our house is on a street called Surf Avenue, and it's only a block from the beach. Funny enough, I know how to surf. It would honestly be pretty pathetic if I lived on a street called Surf Ave without even knowing how to do it. I'd lived there my whole childhood, so the boardwalk and sand had always been a part of my routine, damn near a part of my personality, to be honest. I don't live in that specific house anymore, but the property has stayed in the family, so it still feels like a piece of me. At the time, I was on my high school varsity's cross-country team, and I was kind of obsessive about staying in shape, even during the off-season. Summers get insanely hot down the shore, so I usually ran super early in the morning, or late at night, times when I wouldn't melt in the heat or have to be that jerk weaving in between crowds. That night, I decided to go for a late-night run. I'd stayed up pretty late with some friends the night before and slept in that morning, so I kind of had no choice. I never brought my phone with me when I ran. It was always annoying not having music, but even that little bit of extra weight would be enough to throw me off. I don't know if they still make them anymore, but I had this rinky-dinky little Garmin watch that I used to track distance and pace. Besides that, the only other thing I'd carry was my house keys. To put it mildly, my parents were incredibly uptight about keeping the house locked, so as annoying as it was, I really had no choice but to stuff my house keys in my shorts pocket every time I went for a run, even if they were home. It was one of those non-negotiable rules. I still don't really understand why my parents were so concerned about it, especially because most private beach towns are typically super safe, but that's neither here nor there. I decided to stick to the boardwalk that night. The surface was just soft enough to be easy on my legs, but not as brutal as running on the sand. Sometimes I'd jog on the beach for a challenge, but that wasn't happening after the day I'd had. I just wanted a nice, easy long run with minimal changes in elevation or terrain. The boardwalk would give me just that. I started zoning out after a few miles, enjoying that euphoric runner's high. I always tell people, even today, if you could break that first mental barrier which occurs after about 3 miles or so, the rest of the run is easy and borderline enjoyable. Anyway, I was listening to the slap of my shoes against the wood while simultaneously trying to concentrate on the distant sounds of the ocean. I was in that perfect rhythm where you forget you're even running. But then I heard it. A faint clink. I stopped and checked my pocket. Empty. My stomach dropped. It was my keys. I crouched down, peering through the gaps in the boardwalk, but it was useless. It was pitch black under there, and there was no way I'd even be able to retrieve them from where I was. I started cursing, literally yelling out loud. I know that sounds a little silly, but the adrenaline was still pumping through me from the exercise, and I was pissed that this detour had ruined my run. I knew my parents would have killed me if I came back without those keys, so without really thinking, I jumped off the side and headed down to the sand. It was also partly a matter of pride. I wasn't just going to walk away from one of my personal belongings. Who does that? The smell under the boardwalk hit me instantly. It was like rotten seaweed mixed with stale beer. That's honestly the best way to describe it. Imagine literally filling a bathtub with seaweed and beer. It was damp and heavy, and every step I took, I kicked up sand and trash. Like I said before, I didn't have my phone with me, so the backlight on my watch was the only thing guiding me. It wasn't doing much. I crouched down to the spot where I thought my keys had fallen. They were nowhere in sight. Just more clumps of sand and scraps of garbage. I'll repeat myself, it was disgusting, but I needed those keys. I thought about just leaving them, but decided that I had gotten this far, and turning back now would mean I had gotten covered in garbage and stench for nothing. I tried shifting the sand around a bit, thinking maybe they had fallen beneath the surface. But after a few minutes, frustration started to creep in. And I'd really misjudged the spot by that much. I concluded that that was the most rational explanation, that I had somehow misjudged where they had fallen. I climbed back up to the boardwalk, stood where I had stopped running, and thought about how I could be sure of the spot underneath. That's when I got this genius idea to use my shoelace as a marker. I knelt down, untied it, and slipped it between the planks, letting it hang. That way, I could crawl back onto the boardwalk and spot it from below easily. As I was standing back up, something tugged on the lace and it instantly disappeared into the crack. Not a breeze, not me moving weirdly. Something from below. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was literally in shock. Someone had pulled it. I took a step back and stared at the spot where my shoelace had just been. There was someone underneath the boardwalk. I instantly put two and two together. Whoever was under there probably had my keys too. My first instinct was to run home and figure it out later, but the thought of someone having my house keys, knowing where I lived, made my blood boil. Our house address was etched into them, so I couldn't just leave some stranger with that kind of access. I still don't know why I did it. Call it stupid teenage confidence, but I took a deep breath, jumped back into the sand, and crawled under again. It felt different the second time. The air felt heavier, and I was bracing myself for some kind of fight. At one point, I heard faint shuffling somewhere ahead of me. My chest tightened. I swung my watchlight toward the sound, but saw nothing, just more sand and beams. I kept moving, and I heard shuffling again, this time from a different direction. That's when I realized the noise wasn't coming from one spot. There were multiple people under there. That was enough for me. Common sense struck me in the face like a freight train. What in the world could I have possibly expected to happen? Was I just gonna fight some crackhead living under the boardwalk? That was suicide. I turned to get out of there, trying not to panic. But before I could make it all the way out, something cold latched onto my ankle. It was a hand. I screamed in pain as fingernails dug into my skin. I didn't think. I just kicked as hard as I could. My foot connected with something, and whoever was holding onto my ankle let go. I scrambled away, my legs and arms scraping against the sand and wood as I pushed myself out into the open air. I didn't stop running. I sprinted straight back to my house. When I reached the front door, I pounded on it until my dad opened up. To say he was pissed would be a massive understatement. He was livid. I was surprised he didn't get physical with me. Before he could fully flip out, I explained everything: the keys, the shoelace, the people under the boardwalk. The commotion woke my mom up, who was furious at first, but when she saw the marks on my ankle, her expression shifted to something closer to fear. My dad didn't waste time. He called the police, and the next morning, we had a locksmith come out and change all the locks on the house. For a couple of days, things felt normal again. I figured that was the end of it, just a weird, messed up night that I tried to forget. But then, a few mornings later, I woke up to loud knocking at the front door. It was early, way too early for visitors. I sat in bed for a while, waiting for my parents to go deal with it. When neither of them did, I decided to do it myself, so I pulled on a hoodie and went downstairs. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. Confused, I opened the door, looking around. There was no one in sight. I glanced around the street, no cars, no people. Right when I was about to close the door, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Sitting on the doormat was a shoelace. My shoelace. The one from that night. I slammed the door shut without another thought. We got a security system installed that afternoon. For weeks afterwards, my family lived in constant fear, but nothing ever happened after that. When I think back to this experience, I still can't rationalize the events that took place. Even though I don't live in that house anymore, it still kind of creeps me out that some random stranger knows where our beach house is. The thing about living in a beach town during the off-season is that it feels deserted. The tourists are long gone, the storefronts are mostly boarded up, and the boardwalk, the heart of the town in the summer, is nothing but an empty skeleton of itself. I like it though. It's peaceful. That's why for the longest time I go for late-night runs on the boardwalk in the off-season, when no one was there. It was my detox from life and all the stresses that come with it. Sometimes you just need to be away from people. There was something about the sound of the waves and the rhythmic slap of my sneakers against the wooden planks that calmed me. It made me feel like I had the whole world to myself. Tonight was no different. The air was crisp, carrying that scent of salt and damp wood. The only lights came from the occasional street lamp, buzzing faintly, casting long, lonely shadows. I was maybe a mile in when I got that feeling. The one where you just know you're not alone. I glanced over my shoulder. A man stood in the distance, not walking, not moving, just standing there on the boardwalk facing me. I swallowed and turned back around, shaking it off. It was probably nothing. Maybe just another local taking a walk. But honestly, no matter what, that's still gonna be an eerie sight to see. I kept running, but a few minutes later, the feeling of being followed or watched came back even stronger. My heart thudded more intensely, not from exertion, but something else. The curiosity to turn around again thickened, so I turned around again. He was closer, still not moving, still just standing there facing me. A deep, crawling unease settled in my stomach. I picked up the pace, now taking out my one headphone that I had in. My feet pounded against the wood, breath coming quicker, but every few moments, I heard footsteps behind me, in sync with mine. I turned again. He was even closer, but still, he was completely still. I broke into a sprint. The once soothing boardwalk felt like an endless trap, stretching too far in both directions. My car was at the very end, parked right by the beach entrance. I just had to make it there. I ran harder than I ever had before. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I refused to stop. Every few seconds, I turned my head just enough to check, and every single time, he was a little closer, still standing and still watching. I didn't understand how he was able to stop so suddenly every time I turned around. I wasn't even looking where I was going anymore, just focused on getting away. The boardwalk exit finally came into view, and I nearly sobbed in relief when I saw my car. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely press the unlock button. Finally, the lights flashed, and I yanked the door open, throwing myself inside and slamming it shut. I turned the key in the ignition and backed the car out of the spot. When I put the car in drive to whip the wheel to the left to turn out of there, I looked ahead, and the man was standing directly in front of my car, right where my car had just been. But I looked at him so briefly that I didn't even have time to make out any features. All I saw was that he had his hood up, covering a decent chunk of his face. I cranked the wheel to the left and almost spun out as I whipped my car out of there. The entire way home, I didn't care if I ran a red light, if I swerved, or if I nearly spun out. I just drove. I didn't look back. When I got home, I locked every door, every window, every possible entrance. I didn't sleep that night, and I've had a couple of nightmares referencing that experience, both in which that man appeared in some form, watching me or chasing me. My mind created its own versions of what he looked like, I guess, since I really didn't see his face, and they were not pretty images. I haven't done a winter run on the boardwalk since then,